There are floors you clean, and there are floors that clean you. I had spent the past 12 years polishing the same marble tiles of the Hawthorne Financial Building, 42 stories of glass chrome, and people who didn't know my name. They called me ma'am when they remembered to be polite, the cleaning lady when they didn't. My name is Isabel Alvarez, and I used to believe invisibility was just part of the job. That morning, the lobby still smelled of cedar polish and expensive coffee. The kind of scent rich people don't notice anymore. I was on my knees, scrubbing a scuff mark left by some executive's Italian leather shoe, when I heard the click of heels behind me. Laughter followed. Then a voice. God, does she always do that on her knees? I'd be exhausted. It was Bryce, one of the mid-level managers, with too much gel in his hair and too little respect in his bones. His words weren't meant for me. They never were. But this time he looked down. You missed a spot, he said, pointing at nothing. Not that it matters. HR's cutting staff next week. Just a heads up. He smiled. The kind of smile you give to the waiter after you've undertipped them. I didn't say a word. Just nodded. And that's how it ended. No meeting. No thank you. Just a smirk and a stain on my uniform that hadn't yet dried. But what Bryce didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the building he looked down on me from, I already owned part of it, and soon I'd be back, not with a mop, with keys. There's a particular kind of silence that follows humiliation. Not loud or angry, just hollow, like a room stripped of all its furniture. That's what I carried with me down the service elevator that day. Not the mop, not the cart, just that emptiness. By the time I reached street level, I was no longer Isabel, the worker. I was just another woman in a cheap jacket holding a box of forgotten things no one would miss. The world outside didn't notice. Cars honked. People rushed the city, kept spinning as if I had never been there. I went home to my small apartment in Queens Walls, yellowed by time, a broken microwave door. I kept meaning to fix. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the letter from HR. We regret to inform you, it began. But there was no regret, not even a signature. They hadn't even printed it on company letterhead. That night, I watched a video online, some young CEO talking about grit and self-made success. He stood in front of a marble wall that looked familiar. The Hawthorne lobby. My lobby. I laughed, just once. A bitter, breathless sound, because while they were building brands, I had been scrubbing the fingerprints off their empires. And the more I wiped, the more invisible I became. But let me tell you something. Invisibility is powerful. It lets you see everything, hear everything, collect every slight, every smirk, every name they forgot to ask for. They thought I had nothing, that I was no one. But what they never knew, not Bryce, not the board, not even the doorman who used to avoid eye contact, was that I had a door of my own. A door no one had seen me unlock yet. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. 3 weeks had passed since I was let go. I had sold my gold bracelet, a gift from my mother to cover rent. I spent my afternoons applying to cleaning jobs, my evenings wiping down second-hand shelves at a thrift store near Jackson Heights. No more marble lobbies, just worn tile floors and fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, thumb hovering over decline, but something told me to pick up. Mrs. Alvarez, a voice asked. This is Daniel Huang with Ridge & Co. Legal. I'm the probate attorney for the estate of Mr. Samuel Hayes. I blinked. I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong... No. He said gently. Mr. Hayes listed you as a beneficiary. His will instructed us to reach out to you personally. My stomach tightened. Sam Hayes. I hadn't heard that name in years. He had been my husband's old mentor, an architect who worked closely with Emilio before his passing. A quiet man who used to drop by for cafecito and talk design with my husband long after the blueprints had been finalized. I remembered vaguely that Sam had helped secure the original investors for the Hawthorne building, the same building I had just been fired from. Can you come in tomorrow morning? The attorney asked. There's something you need to see. The next day I sat in a glass-walled office downtown as Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside deeds, contracts, and a letter dated 15 years ago. To Isabel, it read, "You and Emilio believed in the Hawthorne project when no one else did. As promised, I held your 5% equity stake in trust until the day you'd need it most. You probably forgot, but I didn't. People like you. You deserve to be part of what you helped build." I stared at the words. My hands shook. 5%. It wasn't a majority, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt like I had leverage. I didn't call anyone. Not yet. I let the truth settle in my bones first. Not like lightning, but like roots. 5% might not sound like much in the world of boardrooms and billion-dollar leases. But in a building like Hawthorne, it was enough to get in the room. Enough to ask questions. Enough to make people nervous if you knew how to use it. And I was learning. I started spending afternoons at the public library, poring over old property records and city filings. I watched YouTube videos about real estate law. I took notes. Like I used to take orders quietly, quickly, precisely. Then I contacted Marisol, my niece, a second-year business law student at NYU, who owed me at least a dozen babysitting hours from when she was young. "Tia," she said after looking over the documents, "this isn't just a stake. It's a silent partner clause. You have veto rights on structural changes. You could block any major leasing shift." Her eyes gleamed. Mine narrowed. I wasn't interested in blocking. I wanted to build. I worked the night shift at the thrift store and spent my mornings observing. I lingered near the Hawthorne building, watching who came and went, who still held the keys, who was quietly slipping out with folders at odd hours. Eventually I saw him, Bryce laughing in the lobby with a client shaking hands, like he'd never thrown me out like trash, like I was never real. That's when I knew it wasn't enough to return. I had to return differently. The foundation was already mine. Now it was time to raise the walls. I didn't walk back into Hawthorne Tower with a press release or a lawyer at my side. That's not how change works. Not real change. It happens slowly, deliberately, like a fuse burning in silence before the blast. I began with emails. Short, polite, and signed and only with my name. I requested to attend a quarterly building stakeholder meeting, a right, reserved for equity holders. My name wasn't on any press list. No one noticed, except one person, Bryce Halton. Bryce was the kind of man who mistook arrogance for leadership. His promotion to head of operations had nothing to do with competence and everything to do with bloodlines, his father. Reginald Halton, the chairman of the board and original developer of Hawthorne, had handed him the title like a party favor. But instead of earning his place, Bryce strutted through the marble halls with borrowed power and cheap cruelty. He treated assistants like disposable ink pens and security guards like furniture. The man couldn't calculate basic square footage without a spreadsheet, but he could humiliate a janitor with Olympic-level precision. He had turned Hawthorne into his playground until I showed up. At the meeting, when I walked into the boardroom, wearing the same second-hand navy blazer I wore the day they fired me, Bryce's smirk curled like old milk. "Miss Alvarez," he said, lips twitching. "Is this open to the public now?" I slid my ownership papers across the table. "I believe it's open to stakeholders, Mr. Halton, and I have just enough to make my voice very hard to ignore." He stared, blinked, chuckled nervously. The next 48 hours were a game of chess, and I had already studied the board. First, I reached out to the building's two largest commercial tenants, a boutique investment firm and a wellness tech company on floors 17 and 21. Both had been on the verge of pulling out due to unresolved maintenance issues and rising costs. I knew because I'd overheard their complaints while scrubbing their glass doors at night. I scheduled quiet off-the-record meetings, introduced myself not as Isabel the janitor, but Isabel the stakeholder. I listened, truly listened, then showed them the clause in my trust that allowed me to propose agenda items at quarterly ownership reviews. I don't want to shake the building. I said I want to steady it. They signed on to support my proposals. Next, I called the tenants' union rep. a single mom named Nina, who worked 2 jobs and had been petitioning for safer stairwell lighting for months without response. We met at a diner. I bought her coffee. I left with her trust. Then came the maintenance team, the ones who had quietly slipped me a heads up when Bryce planned my termination. I found them still eating lunch in the basement break room, sitting at the same fold-out table I once wiped down. "Nothing's changed," one of them muttered. "Just suits passing blame to other suits. I'm not a suit," I told them. "But I'm done being a ghost, and I need your help." And just like that, they were in. By the time the next stakeholder meeting arrived, I had tenants' maintenance staff, and even 2 board allies prepared. When Bryce walked in confident and loud, he didn't see the trap waiting. He was still playing a power game. He hadn't noticed that I had rewritten the rules. The boardroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the AC. Or maybe it was Bryce's confidence evaporating the second he saw me already seated at the table. Not against the wall like I used to be, not fetching coffee, but sitting upright with a folder in front of me, and a nameplate that read, Isabel Alvarez, stakeholder. He paused mid-step, did a double-take and scoffed. "You're in the wrong room." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm exactly where I belong." The others shifted awkwardly. Bryce walked around me and took his seat at the head of the table, still believing he had control. Still playing king in a crumbling castle. "Let's keep this brief," he said, flipping through his tablet. "The building's image has been damaged. Tenants are ungrateful. Maintenance is overspending. I've prepared a proposal for a third-party restructuring firm to come in and streamline operations, reduce redundant roles, repurpose space, and phase out unnecessary expenses." A few heads nodded, half listening, until I spoke. "Would that include $7,000 spa weekends disguised as leadership retreats?" I asked. Silence. I opened my folder slowly, because that's what's listed under expense report. 18B filed by you under executive development, along with catered brunches for 3 car service to Hamptons and a 5-figure bonus to a consultant who has no record of ever entering the building. Bryce's smile cracked. "You've been digging through records," he said. "No," I said. "I've been restoring them. What you've buried, I've brought to light." I stood up and slid copies of the documents across the table. Then another stack: tenant complaints, citations from the fire marshal, a petition from 8 businesses demanding new leadership. A murmur spread. Nina from the tenant union stepped forward from the back of the room, raising her voice. "You ignored our requests." "She didn't," Bryce snapped. "This is absurd. She was a janitor, a cleaner. She doesn't have the background to manage a complex property." Mr. Langston, gray-haired and quiet, until now looked at him with tired eyes. "And you were handed your title by your father, Bryce, and you've treated it like your birthright." He turned to me. "At least she earned her place." I took a breath. "I move that Bryce Halton be immediately removed from day-to-day management and suspended pending a full fiduciary audit," seconded, Langston said without hesitation. Hands went up, one by one, unanimous. Bryce stood frozen, his face red, jaw clenched. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "This building will fall apart without me." I stood too slow and steady. "No, Bryce," I said. "This building was falling apart because of you." And for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes, the kind that comes not from losing a title, but from realizing you were never the one holding it together in the first place. As he stormed out, I didn't gloat. I just sat back down, opened my notebook, and turned to a fresh page. It was time to rebuild. Properly. They say power changes people, but the truth is, it reveals them. The morning after the vote, Bryce's name was already scraped off the office directory. His access badge was revoked before lunch. No press release, no farewell email. Just a silence that felt finally earned. I didn't take his office. I took the old conference room on the 8th floor, the one with peeling paint, flickering lights, and a view of the alley. It wasn't about symbolism. I just wanted to be closer to the mailroom, the janitor's closet, the freight elevator, the parts of this building that everyone else had forgotten, but that I had never stopped seeing. The first thing I did was call a staff-wide meeting. No suits required. No agenda printed. Just coffee, folding chairs, and an open mic in the atrium. At first, no one spoke. People were hesitant, unsure if this was a trap or a new kind of corporate theater. So I broke the silence. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," I said. "I know what it's like to give your best and be told it's not enough. I was told that I didn't belong, that I should stay quiet, keep my head down and leave the decisions to people with cleaner shoes." A few smiles. A few nods. But I also know this building doesn't run on suits and titles. It runs on people. On work that's done after hours between paychecks without applause. Now they were listening. I told them about the new audit process. Transparent, independent. About the return of tenant roundtables. About the anonymous reporting system for misconduct. Not just for staff, but for vendors and interns too. And I told them something no one expected. I'm not here forever. But while I'm here, I will listen, and I will act. After the meeting, people didn't rush off. They lingered. Maya came up to me holding a maintenance checklist from her old department. I've had some thoughts. She said about what real strategic operations could look like. I smiled. Let's build it. 6 months later, the building didn't look all that different. Not from the outside, anyway. Same glass exterior, same revolving door. But inside, everything had changed. The elevators no longer skipped the maintenance floors. The break room now had a suggestion board filled with sticky notes. Some silly, some brilliant. The security guards wore new uniforms and were rotated fairly, so no one got stuck with every overnight shift. There were plants now. Laughter kids visiting parents after school. A bulletin board where someone had pinned a picture of a pizza party with the caption, "First one." Bryce never took credit for. As for me, I didn't wear heels. Still caught the early train. Still walked the halls like I had a mop in one hand and a to-do list in the other. But now people looked me in the eye. "Morning. Ms. Alvarez," they'd say with something genuine behind it. Sometimes they'd stop me share ideas. Ask about the new internship program I was piloting with the local community college. One aimed at training young people for property management careers. Ones they wouldn't be locked out of because they didn't have the right connections. One afternoon, I found myself back on the 42nd floor. The view was as breathtaking as ever. But what caught my eye was the reflection in the glass, not the skyline. May, older than most of them. Slower maybe, but steadier. I pulled out the letter Samuel Hayes had left me, creased and worn now, from how many times I'd reread it. "You probably forgot, but I didn't." Neither did I. I never forgot what it felt like to be overlooked, or underestimated, or erased. And maybe that's why I was the right person for the job after all. Not to tear down what was broken, but to rebuild it in a way that meant no one had to feel that way again. Behind me, someone knocked lightly on the door. It was Tomas with a blueprint in one hand and 2 cafecitos in the other. "Ready to redesign the break room?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "Let's make it a place worth staying."